Hello, welcome to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm moving along to the next chapter and getting there. Uh, this chapter is not a family ancestry history, but it's one I had written about myself and Stephanie, my bride, about getting married, dating, and so it's the beginning of what ended up being the Jones clan. But I hope you enjoy it. This is a pretty long story. Let's see. There's 15. It's over 30 pages long, so it'll probably take me an hour to do the whole thing. So I'm going to do half of it today, and the next time I present, I'll do the other half, which starts with the wedding day. I hope you enjoy the story. So let's start with this one. Chapter 4, Finding Joy. And I subtitled it Moving from Me to Us, Learning to be part of a couple. Stephanie was only my third date. I don't know if I said anything in here about that, but she didn't run from me, so she was doomed to be married to me. Bless her heart. But I think she liked it too. So let me start here. Dating history. I had, I always had an unfruitful dating life. Girls made me very nervous, and it was difficult to talk to any girl that wasn't related to me, sisters, cousins, the like. I'm sure I was not the only fellow that felt or suffered from this affliction. You've seen the boys that were afflicted. They stood far from the girls at school. Events such as dancing and sometimes other events, and we giggled and laughed to hide our weakness and our shyness. At least that's what I thought it was. I had an excuse to avoid talking to even the girls that may have shown some interest in me. The trouble is that when you start down this path, it becomes harder to change the behavior the longer you reside there. I knew this, and so I was determined to overcome this difficulty. It was not easy to overcome that kind of behavior, but it can be done. That is, through sheer willpower, it can be done. By the time I left high school, I had been turned down more than once, but I think that set a strong sense of willpower in the way I thought about it. My dating history was not a pretty picture. I took one girl to the drive-in that was my sister Peggy's friend. She was a pretty little girl, but her teeth were so bad that it made me feel ill when she breathed upon me. Sitting in the back seat of my sister's car on a double date with her friend was a little uncomfortable to start with. Her friend tried everything she could to make me want to kiss her, but her breath was had prevented that. I had no idea how to tell her without hurting her feeling. I would have kissed her had she had better breath. When my sister asked me the next day why I would not kiss her friend, I told her to let her friend know why. She never wanted to date me again. I guess it embarrassed her. I didn't know if it was embarrassment or anger, but that was the last date I had with her. My next date, I took I took to the same drive-in, and in my car, she was a friend of another one of my sisters. She was also a lovely little lady, but I got the distinct feeling that she only went to the drive-in with me to see the movie that was playing. Of course, you know why I take girls to the drive-in, and it was not to watch the movie. My car was a 1962 Pontiac Tempest, and it had a bench seat across the front. The, this girl's name was Laura, and she sat against the door on the passenger side and left me sitting on in the driver's side with what seemed like a great distance between us. When I put my arm on the lean back, I could only touch her shoulder, and she kind of withdrew from me. With such a reaction, I left her alone the rest of that evening. My next date, I found the girl at the skating rink and asked if she would like to go to the drive-in with me the next weekend to watch, to which she agreed. When I got off work Friday afternoon, I made ready and drove over to pick her up. After about an hour before the movie started, we went and had a soda and a hamburger, and after dinner we drove to the drive-in theater. Everything seemed fine to me, and I thought we were getting along splendidly. She sat close to me as we drove to the drive-in, and she sat with me as the movie started. That's when she asked if she could go be excused for a few moments, to which I replied, "Oh, yes, go ahead." She slid over to the door and got out of the car and walked away toward the concession stand. I waited patiently, but she never returned. After about a half hour, I walked to the concession stand and checked inside, but she wasn't there. I stepped out the right side of the concession stand where the ladies' restroom was, and I asked a woman to check inside to see if Martha was in the bathroom. She came out in about 3 or 4 minutes and said, "There's no one by that name of Martha, inside." I couldn't imagine what had happened, but I did go back to my car and I sat there until the movie was over. About 2 or 3 minutes after the movie was ended, Martha came up and got into the car and sat down. She slid over close to me and really didn't say anything. We kind of sat quietly through the advertisements for the concession stand until the second movie started. Because Friday night were double bill nights, as the second movie began, I asked Martha if I could go to the snack bar and get uh, us something and bring it back during the second movie. Martha looked at me as if to say, "That's a good idea." She replied, "I'd like some popcorn and Pepsi and maybe some bonbon ice creams." I opened the door and slid out of the car and walked to the snack bar and got in line with about 6 or 8 other people grumbling something about enjoying during the movie. I thought to myself, I'm not going to say anything about her going. Maybe she met a friend and got lost track of time. And I picked up a couple of large Pepsis, a large popcorn, and some bonbon ice cream balls for her. And I slowly walked back to the car, trying to balance everything without losing a thing. When I got to the car, there was no one inside. It seemed like Martha had wandered off in my absence. At first, I was a little alarmed, but decided she must have gone to the ladies' room and that she would be back in a few minutes. Those cars don't have cup holders, or didn't have cup holders then, but the dashboards were wide enough you could set up the popcorn on top of it, and it fit nicely against the windshield. I set the popcorn and the bonbons on the seat, uh, and started sipping on my soda. I started watching the movie and became involved in it, so that time passed a little faster. Before I knew it, the movie was almost half over, and I realized the bonbons were melting, so I ate them because Martha had not returned. By this time, I was becoming a little angry that Martha had me pay for her to come to the drive in, but did not want to sit with me. The more I sat there alone, the more I began to fume over Martha's absence. The movie ended, and Martha had not returned, and many other cars in the theater had already left. So I uh, scanned all the remaining vehicles, and I watched for Martha to get out of one of them. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the movie was over, and about 80% of the cars had left when I spied Martha getting out of a four-door sedan, 3 rows up and about 5 car spaces down. But when Martha got out of the car, a boy got out with her and hugged her and kissed her. Then he got back into the car back seat of the car and they had been sitting in. By this time I was very angry. I knew she had been sitting in the back seat of that car with another boy at my expense. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I would not let this slide. As the other boy got back into the car, it drove off and headed to the exit. By that time, I was the only car left in the entire drive-in as Martha walked toward me. I started my car and I pulled out to the aisle as she came up toward my car. I waited until she was fairly close behind the car. Then I spun out and looked in the mirror as I left her standing in the drive-in by herself. There was a payphone outside the concession stand, and she would simply have to call someone else to come pick her up because I was not going to carry her home. Well, needless to say, I did not date for some time after that. I joined the Navy and spent a couple of years aboard a ship before I was released, and I came home. By this time, my good friend John had been in the Army and had come back to Modesto after his discharge. I took a job in a service station as a service station attendant and began to reestablish a life for myself, and John did the same thing. The third member of our trio was Mike, and he had not joined the service but stayed home and took a job with the United States Postal Service as a carrier. I Want Her is the title of the next section of this story. Mike, John, and I renewed our acquaintance, and like young men do, we began to talk about girls. We decided we needed to have a double or triple date on this upcoming weekend, and John responded with, I know a girl who knows a lot of other girls. I will call her, and we will all have dates for Friday night. At that, Mike and I thought how wonderful it was that John was going to arrange dates for both of us besides having a date himself. When Friday night rolled around, Mike came over and picked me up in his car, and we drove over to and met John, and he directed us to the girl's house in the next town called Turlock. On the way over, John said, "I don't think I want to date this girl. So if either of you want her, you could have her, and I have arranged a date for me. I'll have her arrange a date for me and the other one of you." Mike didn't say anything, but after a couple of seconds, I announced that I would be glad to have her as my date. So we had already divided the girls up before we got to her house. When we pulled up in front of the house, John got out and went up, knocked on the door. In a few seconds, the porch light came on and the door swung open, and the prettiest little lady I had ever seen stepped onto the front porch. I took my elbow and gently shoved Mike in the shoulder and said, "You should have spoke up because she's a very pretty girl, but now she's mine." John stood on the steps with her, and they spoke for a few minutes, and then John came back to get into his car. Mike and I both asked him, "Did she get some other girls to go with us?" To which John replied, "Yeah, but we've got to go back to Modesto to pick them up." In a couple of minutes, the prettiest little girl came out to the car and got into the back seat with John. John introduced the girl to us as Stephanie, and he introduced both Mike and myself to Stephanie. At that point, we started driving to Modesto, where the other girls were supposed to be waiting for us. When we got to Modesto, we went to the first girl's house that was supposed to go with us. When she came out onto her porch step, she told Stephanie that her parents would not let her go and that she couldn't get another girl or another friend to go with us either. Stephanie came back to the car and delivered the terrible news to John and Mike and myself. At that point of the at the sound of the terrible news, we decided to the we would not go to the theater, but rather go back to my house. I lived in an 8 foot by 40 foot trailer house, which was parked on the back of mom and dad's property in Modesto. Mike parked his car in front of the trailer, and we all got out and went inside. In a few minutes, John took Stephanie by the hand and walked her to the back bedroom of the trailer house, and he shut the door. Mike and I sat in the living room and talked about things that might have been had the other girls come along. After about 10 minutes, we heard the sound of a face being slapped, and the door flew open and Stephanie came to the living room. John was following about 10 steps behind her, and they both sat down. Mike and I did not know what had happened, but we could guess that John had gotten in a big hurry and overstepped his bounds. Miss Stephanie demanded of Mike that he drive us back home, to which Mike agreed, and we all went out to Mike's car, and John and Stephanie crawled into the back seat, and Mike and I got in the front seat. Miss Stephanie lived in Turlock, and my house was in Modesto, so we had about a 20-minute drive to get to Miss Stephanie's house. During the ride home, the quarrel between John and Stephanie had reached a fever pitch. Miss Stephanie then turned her face out the window and slid to the other side of the car, leaving a space in the center because John was still on the other side of the res- car. Rescuing the damsel was our next heading. I like John, but Miss Stephanie was very pretty, and it looked to me like Miss Stephanie needed to be rescued from John. The back seat had become very quiet by now, as though they were both angry at each other. I leaned over toward Mike, who was driving, and in a very quiet voice asked if he would mind if I crawled over the seat to assist Miss Stephanie. Mike looked over at me and said, I don't care if you think you could help. Mike then gave me a big smile and winked his eye. I winked back at Mike and I crawled right over that seat and I sat between John and Miss Stephanie. I took Miss Stephanie's hand in my hand and I asked her if she was all right. Miss Stephanie looked at me and replied to my question that she thought she would be okay once she got home. She said, I didn't think it was a good idea to come to start with. I should have known better, and I didn't even want to see John again. At that, I put my arm over her shoulder and I comforted her and said, I would never have put you in that kind of situation. I asked that she not be angry with us. We rode the rest of the way to Miss Stephanie's house with John sitting right behind Mike, and I was next to John, and Miss Stephanie was on the passenger side of the car near the window. Nobody said anything else until we arrived at Miss Stephanie's house. When Mike stopped, I reached up and opened the passenger side door and got out and helped Miss Stephanie out of the car. Miss Stephanie and I walked toward her front door. The porch light was still on. I helped her on the step and I took her hand in my hand. Would you mind if I came by myself next Friday and took you to the movie? Miss Stephanie looked me in the eye and gave me a little smile and said, I think I would like that very much. I let go of her hand and I turned and I walked to the car. I stopped for a moment and looked back and told her I couldn't wait till next Friday. I then ran out to the car and I got in the front seat and I shut the door. And I know I had a big grin on my face. I was happy with myself. We started driving back to Modesto to take John home first and then me home. As we were driving back to Modesto, I looked back at John and said, I hope I didn't make you mad. He told me it didn't upset him because he wasn't very fond of her to start with. He said she had a lot of other girls. He said she knows a lot of other girls, and that's why we went to her house first. I told John I thought she was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, and I thought he was crazy for giving her away. We all had a big laugh, and when we got to John's house, we let him out of the car. Mike and I went on to my house where Mike let me out, and he headed home. When I lay down to sleep that night, I thought about how lucky I had been to have a date with such a pretty girl, and I hope I would not mess it up or that she wouldn't turn out to be like the other girls I had dated. I knew that I would have that question answered in about a week. I was really quite excited about it, and the week seemed to drag on forever. Friday night finally came, and I made myself ready in all of my finery I could adorn myself with. I wanted to make a wonderful impression, not really realizing I had already made my first impression when I crawled over the seat to comfort Miss Stephanie. I learned later that Stephanie thought that was an act of gallantry. I'd never been accused of that before. Miss Stephanie and I were very compatible, and we began to be very much in love with each other as we dated over the next several months. I think it was on our second or third date, I asked Miss Stephanie if she would think about marrying me, to which she replied, maybe. After that, I began to tell Miss Stephanie that I was going to marry her and she would be my wife. I believe I told her that every day that we went on a date, whether we went to the cave in the mountains or to the drive-in in Ceres, a little town where all of my other dates had happened. Miss Stephanie was a nice, decent girl, and she liked me. It made me feel on top of the world. Some days I would go pick Miss Stephanie up and bring her to work with me at the service station where I worked the night shift, starting at 6 p.m. and getting off at 2 in the morning. I would go pump gas and check engines, and Miss Stephanie would sit in the office waiting until I was through, and we would talk the whole night long. We would hold hands and speak of the hopes and the plans and the dreams we had and how we hoped to accomplish them. We came to know each other very well. Miss Stephanie had some odd characteristics, but I thought they were cute. I would say, I love you. And she would reply, same here. It was hard for her to say the words. I knew I had found my soulmate standing on that porch outside her front door there in Turlock when I had first seen her. But I don't think Miss Stephanie was convinced that I was her soulmate until after 2 or 3 months had passed with our dating. I knew Miss Stephanie was convinced that I was her soulmate because one day she said, yes, I will marry you. And I knew from that moment on that our love was as precious, as rare as gold, and as sweet as the breath of life itself. I thank God for all the unfaithful girls I had met in my dating life because it made Stephanie so much more precious to my heart. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll read the second half of this story, starting with the heading Wedding Day. And you'll get a kick out of this day. And then I talk about the wedding night. And our next chapter will be Moving a Mile High. But I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you like it and you want to learn more, you can go to my web page, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, or you can go to my Facebook page, which is Curtis Jones Author Page on Facebook. I have 14 books listed up there. You could, from these, they have descriptions of each book at both those sites, but both of them have links that can take you to Amazon where the books are for sale. And you can get you a copy of this very book on that site. God bless you and keep you until we talk next time. Take care. Bye-bye.